Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Yee, and I'm on the product marketing team here at Okta. I market our lifecycle management product. Today, we're going to talk about workflows. This is meant to be a 101 level session, so if you're a newbie, that's completely okay. This will comprise two parts. The first part will be me talking about workflows, giving you an intro to it, and the second part will be a panel of three Okta customers who use workflows. So, with that, let's get started. You've probably seen this slide before. We talk about lifecycle processes in join, remove, or leaver phases. And this is really complex for many organizations. The joiner basically means onboarding. How do you onboard your users? And this could be complex because you have many different sources of identity, and you also have to assign a lot of resources. The second part is mover. This is all about maintaining changes, which might be personal. They also might be business related, but at the end of it, it's all about granting the right access. And then the third part is the leaver phase. How do you terminate a user? All customers grapple with this, and there's no one size fits all solution for it. Now, our lifecycle management product helps to automate these common join, remove, or leaver scenarios. It's really easy to use. You just click a checkbox to handle any of these onboarding, terminations, and update processes. But customers want to be able to, add in their own logic. They want to add in their own elements of timing. They want to maybe chain together multiple actions in any of these three processes. And the way they've done that to date is really with custom code, oftentimes, and with scripts. We know that's not ideal because custom code and scripts are not maintainable. Oftentimes, it's one skilled person in the IT team who does it. What happens when they leave? You're often left with a mess. So with workflows, we want to provide an alternative. Workflows gives you a systematized way to do this, or using components like events, which are triggers, functions, which are logic, and then actions, which are the actual things in the app that you want to do. So workflows provides this construct. In this example, you can have a trigger such as a user gets assigned to Salesforce within Okta. That kicks off the flow. Then you might want to run some logic that asks, is this user on the EMEA sales team? If so, perform this action in Salesforce, which is assigning an EMEA territory, and then follow that with an action in Slack, which is sending the user a personalized message. So what are some use cases that workflows can solve? Well, we ran a beta and an early adopter program, and customers came to us with hundreds of use cases, which we've bucketed into these four categories. In the upper left, this is all about being able to do that last mile provisioning or deprovisioning into applications, because you can now talk to any action, any API for an app. In the upper right, you want to be able to weave in your own elements of logic and timing into your processes. In the bottom left, you want to be able to handle username conflicts, email conflicts when you're constructing identities. And in the bottom right, how do you share information with the people who need it? So let's talk about the use cases in the upper left. With Okta, you can do basic provisioning with lifecycle management. You can construct, for instance, a Salesforce account. What if you need to go further? What if you need to set up folder shares? What if you need to set up entitlements, etc.? Well, with workflows, you can now do that. So for instance, for Salesforce, you can assign licenses. And let's say you also need to set a territory in Salesforce. But before you do that, you need to first look up that user's team and geography in Okta. It's all possible. What if you need to non-destructively deprovision users? The use case here is you have applications like Box or Google Workspace or maybe even Office 365 that hold assets that a user created during his tenure at the company. Well, if you send a deactivate signal to that to that user, you might also blow away all the assets that he or she created during his tenure. So an alternative is to non-destructively deprovision that user, whereby you first suspend the user in Okta so that user cannot log in. And then you might want to look up that user's manager in Okta. So you're querying Okta because you ultimately want to find his manager so you can transfer all assets to that manager. And then you delete the account in Box. There are use cases too for creating tickets. The most common one is you have a legacy application that does not expose APIs, and therefore you cannot automate provisioning to it. An administrator needs to manually provision. It would be nice if Okta could create a ticket in maybe ServiceNow, tee up that ticket with all the information that the admin needs. And then once the admin gets the ticket, you can manually create the account and then close the ticket. The closing of the ticket can also be a workflow that indicates back to Okta that a manual provisioning job is done, and therefore Okta should share the chiclet for single sign-on purposes. There are also use cases around notifications. The simplest use cases are you just want to notify a user or his manager when new access has been granted. But there are certainly other use cases too for administrators. You might, for instance, want to notify an administrator when Okta fails to provision an account to Salesforce, let's say because the API token expired. So this is a more proactive way of notifying administrators of problems. Let's provide a few examples about the upper right set of use cases, which is all about introducing elements of timing or logic into your processes. A common use case you might want to address is when you terminate users, cut off all access except for maybe the HR or payroll app, because you want to allow the terminated user to download W-2s or pay stubs for 1 year, and then you want to automatically kill off access. Or maybe you have a set of contractors and partners for which you want to provide temporary access. These external users are not in the same systems as your employees, and therefore you cannot manage them in the same way. What often happens is accounts get created for them, but never killed off. So you want to maybe create time-bound access. You have a new contractor, his account lasts for 90 days. At the end of it, automatically turn it off. Or you might want to take an inactivity-based approach whereby you know you've created an account for an external user. You see they have not logged in. Maybe you send them an email warning. If they still haven't logged in, then you deactivate the account 7 days later. So these are just examples of the many that workflows can assist with. The third use case is all about resolving identity creation conflicts. Let's say you have a source of truth, like an HR system, you're importing new users, and then you realize, oh wait, I have Michael Bolton that already exists in my organization. In fact, I have 3 of them. How do I create a username or an email address that does not conflict? In the past, what we said was, well, we'll create you an inline hook, which allows Okta to call it to a third-party service that you run as a customer. And this third-party service would house the logic to, 1, identify the conflict, and then 2, come up with a username and email address that does not conflict. The problem here is that the customer has to code up that logic and also host it. Well, with workflows, we give you an alternative. You still use the import inline hooks, but now workflows, you can build out the logic that does not require code, and workflows will also host it for you. The last set of use cases is all about being able to share information with people that need it. Many customers struggle to pull information out of Okta and then share it because information was in multiple endpoints. Transactional data, for instance, was in the syslog, but non-transactional data was in the API. So for instance, if they needed to find out who failed to log in or who authenticated but failed to log in, which is the transactional data, and then combine it with non-transactional data, like give me a list of all your admins, because they wanted to find out which admin accounts were being hammered and potentially brute forced, that was a pretty onerous task. But now with workflows, you can automate all of that. You can query this, or you can get information live from the syslog via event hooks. And you can, of course, query Okta's APIs to pull out information, combine it together in a spreadsheet, run logic that cleans it up, and then have a workflow that sends it out to maybe the security team. So gives you a brief overview of the use cases. I just want to talk about some brief product capabilities. This is actually what the product looks like. So it's taking a drag and drop approach. It's very visual. You don't see any code here at all. We provide a set of connectors, and these are different from the lifecycle management connectors, which focus more on just the basic create, update, and deactivate of accounts. These connectors and workflows go deeper into an application to expose more of the underlying APIs. And you're not just limited to these connectors, right? If you need to call an API that's not curated here, you can certainly use our API card and call any API and then weave all that logic together. Events can be triggered by things that happen in applications, but they can also be run on a schedule, just like a cron job. You can also set up a workflow as an endpoint, and you can have some other third-party service call it. You can really build rich logic with workflows. You can have essentially the same power as code without code. So you can do things like if this, then that statements. You can do loops. You can also do data manipulation. So if you need to truncate text, if you need to parse out data structures, if you need to create a JSON object, that's all possible, all without code. Now that you've heard about the use cases and some of the capabilities, I'd like to call on the real stars of the show. These are 3 Okta customers, Crista, Neil, and Dan, who are using workflows. So please welcome them on board. We'll start with you, Crista.
Hi, I'm Crista Murphy. I work with Cengage and have been here for the last 10 years. I have been doing system administration for about 20 years in various different industries. I was introduced through Okta when we rolled it out here and quickly fell into the workflows after seeing it last year at Octane.
Neil?
Hi, I'm Neil Azarro. I am the lead IAM engineer at Peloton Interactive. I've been in IT for 20 years. I've been with Peloton for a little over 2. I was probably one of the first people using workflows as Okta released it, and it has saved my bacon more times than I can count, and I literally learn something new every day with it.
Great. And Dan?
Yeah, hi, I'm Dan Bowden, Solutions Architect at Xero, where I've been an Okta admin for around 8 years now. Xero started in New Zealand as online accounting software and has grown into a global business platform featuring much more than the original accounting engine. My roles in the internal IT team have varied over the years, but I've always worked really closely with Okta and everything that we at Xero integrate with it. And recently we've been looking at how we can solve problems and add value using the Okta workflows.
Great. Thank you. So I've asked our panelists to be forthcoming with their experience with workflows. I don't want it just be a marketing rah session for workflows because that wouldn't be authentic. So I want them to talk about the good and the bad and what they've experienced over the past couple of years, or I guess the past year that they've used workflows. So let's start out. So as an organization, for all of you, what are some of the big challenges that you're focusing on, and what are some of the big business challenges you were facing before you began your journey with workflows?
Well, for Cengage, we have a lot of seasonal employees that come in and out in the upper hundreds, 200 that work for maybe 3 to 6 months, and then we have to offboard them again. This was a manual process, often with a lot of tickets, and sometimes with single tickets with over 100 names that would have to be manually overridden, gone into all of our different applications, remove their access or add their access depending on what it is that they needed. And it was really time consuming as well as taking up a lot of our administrators' time for other projects that we were working on. So being able to do life cycle management for our applications that we already had in Okta is making a huge difference for us and bringing us up to do more work on things that we enjoy more.
For us, it was let's see, we onboarded SAP SuccessFactors last July, and we were running into a big issue where capabilities of the profile master weren't really aligning with what we were trying to do in regards to automating account management and also email generation. So what we had to do was use it was currently at a beta test at the time, the inline import hook feature in conjunction with an Okta workflow and build out pretty much everything from scratch on a unique identity creation and also data modification and validation. So if it wasn't for that workflow, we wouldn't have been able to get that rollout off the ground at all.
Yeah, and then for us at Xero, one of our biggest challenges is growth. We've continued to grow year on year. And recently, one of our main focus points has been around automation, looking at the manual tasks that our team perform on a daily basis, where they're not really adding any value to that task, and then removing ourselves completely from the process through automation. So, take application assignments where a user requests access to an application in a ticket. Our support team will receive the ticket, add the user to a group, close the ticket, and just let the user know they should see the app file in Okta within the next hour or so. It doesn't take long, but when they repeat this task over and over throughout the day, it adds up to a lot of wasted time. So our goal was to look at these sorts of processes, and in this one in particular, make as many apps self-service in Okta as possible, allowing the users to add the app themselves instantly and have no involvement from our team.
Got it. Makes sense. Had any of you tried to use other solutions, whether homegrown or third party, to address these needs? And what were your experiences with those other solutions?
Well, we've been using Workday as our HR resource, and that then pushes down through MIM, which is then massaged through specific scripts before we can put it into ESB, which then outputs to different scripts, and then we can import it to AD. And then from AD, we're going into Okta. We've run into a lot of issues where some name changes aren't going through right. We have specific display names that we need to put in for certain users, whether they're contingent workers or employees. And we run into a lot of issues with that, and having scripts that kick off that nobody but the one source of truth knows because he put it together. So it's been an interesting aspect going through now, changing from Workday to the master directly to Okta, and using workflows to replace those scripts that we were using to do all these little different things that we had to massage in order to get it into AD.
Got it. So you're using Microsoft Identity Manager to get information from Workday into Active Directory, but for whatever reason, it wasn't doing a complete job of getting that information over. So you're also complementing it with various scripts to pull data from Workday into AD.
That's correct. A lot of it had to do around the way that our AD is structured, as far as locations and offices that the people were at, as well as names, conflicts, like I said, contingent workers versus employees, that we needed to take that information and put it into a certain format before we could put it into AD so that the other scripts that we have running would also recognize it properly.
Dan or Neil, did you try to use any other third-party resources or maybe scripts and code to handle your needs?
In this particular instance, no, only because we kind of couldn't. The way that we needed to ingest the data needed to be directly into Okta. Because it was going from a profile master, we would have had to route it through an API endpoint and then run scripts there. But we saw the tools that were available through Okta with the inline import hook and the workflows and handling it that way. And we figured, why are we even going to try to do it another way when this is probably going to be our end state anyways?
Yeah, and then we well, actually, a different challenge to the one I mentioned earlier is our user and activity management. So we used to have some custom scripts that would live on an automation server. These would run weekly and look at last login date in AD. If that date was longer ago than 2 weeks for a contractor, then we would send the appropriate notification, um, and in some cases automatically disable the account in AD. This process relied on a number of servers, including an old SMTP server, that resulted in the emails appearing as spam in Google as well. So that was another problem. There were also a few manual steps in the process where an email would be sent to log a ticket to our team that they could then notify the correct person or follow out some actions. So there was a whole lot of technical debt in that solution. And if none of that was good enough reason to redesign the process, when we changed our primary source of truth in Okta to be Workday instead of AD, that whole process broke anyway. So if the script disabled the account in AD, it would momentarily disable the Okta account, but then Workday would just overwrite that, so the account would ultimately stay active. So it was a really complicated, outdated, and broken process that we really needed to fix that.
Got it. Neil, you mentioned that um, workflows was crucial to rolling out your success factors as a source, um, I guess, solution. Can you talk about that a little more?
Sure. So the way that our implementation was set up, we were using a placeholder because Okta would ultimately use or leverage G Suite or Google Workspace to create email accounts based on certain profile attributes, whether it be first name, legal last name, preferred first name, preferred last name, a combination of all of them. And so SuccessFactors itself was not capable of handling all that logic during the account creation. So the implementers and myself kind of decided just to use a placeholder. So it actually uses the word first dot last at our domain. And so that passes through the import hook into the workflow. And the workflow pretty much applies all the logic and rewriting that we needed, massages the data, I guess you could say, and then replies back to the import process. So what's seen in the application import queue is the properly formatted email address of the user using their first name or preferred first and preferred last.
Got it. So you're kind of talking about that, I guess, that third bucket of use cases that I was mentioning during my section, creating, I guess, identifying conflicts in either the username or email, and then having workflows, uh, one, identify the conflict, and then two, come up with an algorithm or use an algorithm to create a non-conflicting username and email address.
Yes, that's correct. It's actually doing a lookup on import, so it'll actually generate the email address on the fly or the format of the email address on the fly, and then actually check against our current records to see if anything's in there, and if there is, it will append a one and or a numeric value and increment and add it back.
Got it. And I know, Crista, you were rolling out Workday as a source. Um, did you have any similar issues that Neil described, or were you trying to use workflows to handle something completely different?
We had a lot of the similar things where the information we were getting from Workday didn't match up what we had originally had in Active Directory. So there were a lot of scripts that we had to create in order to get everything to match correctly. And like I said previously, it wasn't updating properly into Okta. So we were running into issues like names not matching when people had a name change. So we've been slowly working to make Workday our master directly into Okta using workflows to alleviate the pain points that we were previously using scripts and MIM in order to get into Active Directory.
Got it. And then Dan, I know you mentioned that you were previously trying to do some cleanup activities on Active Directory. I think you were looking at, you mentioned the last login attribute, and it was inaccurate, so you had to use workflows to do that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, how does workflows help with that if the data is still bad in Active Directory?
Yeah. So the last login date attribute in Active Directory, we found that it wasn't updated every time a user logged into Okta. It was updated, sometimes only once a week or something like that. So when we were looking at that 2-week period, um, that we were going to allow a contractor before they were considered inactive, our previous script actually had to allow them, I believe it was set to 28 days. So, we were saying after 14 days, we will notify your manager and we will suspend the account. But actually, that period of time was much longer to allow for these inaccuracies with the showing the Okta login date in Active Directory. So, yeah, that was also another problem for us.
Got it. So it's good to hear those stories. I don't know if you can describe what the impact on your business outcomes has been from using workflows. Do you have any way to quantify any of those?
Yeah, well, for me, the first thing that we put in was that self-service flow that I talked about earlier. Um, we took an application that had provisioning in Okta and created a workflow that allowed the user to self-service that application without an approval step, which isn't, because it had provisioning. That's not something that's available natively in Okta. So we first did that for Asana, and in the first week after enabling that workflow, we from our reporting, we saw that we'd allowed 420 users to self-serve that app. So that's 420 application request tickets that our team hadn't need to touch, and also for the user, it's a much better experience. They were just seeing the application straight away. And then secondly, the user inactivity management. It was a lot more complex, but we ended up with a solution that obviously no longer relied on any of our custom code. The automation server, the SMTP server, AD, all of that I discussed earlier, it was all within workflows. There was a number of different workflows that we had to create. And yeah, so obviously it's cloud-based as well. It looks at our users in Okta, so it takes that last login date directly from Okta, not the inaccurate one from AD. And then it notifies the person that needs to be notified, normally a manager, of the users in activity, and we just send that notification out through Slack, so we're not seeing spam notifications and stuff that we were seeing in our email. And then most importantly, that solution now suspends the user in Okta when that's required, and that doesn't get overridden by Workday. So the experience for everyone is better, better reporting, better notifications, and no manual input from our team.
It's great to hear. Neil or Krista, have you been able to quantify the benefits of workflows on these use cases?
For not so much our the onboarding process as I was mentioning before, that huge kind of behemoth of a project, but moreover for trying to either reconcile imports from that inline import hook. We were able to actually generate we're a Google shop, so we were able to generate reports based on our imports from SuccessFactors to see if there were any data discrepancies or anything like that. If we were trying to troubleshoot an account creation, just earlier today, I was building that out a little bit more, and we're running those hourly, so we're actually able to troubleshoot on the fly as imports happen inside of Google Sheet and have something that's shareable with the our HR team and other integrated teams, as well as multiple other areas where we moved our Jira approvals to Slack messages using that. So actually, turnaround on ticket completion and approvals has been cut in half. So that's a nice thing. The leave of absence process or standard that we have where people aren't able to access their accounts. We fully automated that. So coming down from SuccessFactors, if somebody's put on leave, they're automatically suspended in Okta, and all of their sessions are cleared, so nobody can access anything. And we're remaining fully compliant with our HR team on that. And I mean, there's a multiple. I can keep going, but I won't take up everybody's time.
And then Krista, I know you were tactile tickets. I don't know if you have any ways to or any way to quantify the benefits of not having to do that anymore.
Well, we have seen a lot of benefit in that we have turned off the whole ticketing system for those events that we have worked into workflows now. We do a quarterly spot check to make sure that everything is working properly. And as far as we've been testing, it is working right now. So we no longer have to manually provision and deprovision all of those seasonal employees and contingent workers that are coming on. So as far as that, we definitely see a lot of return that we're able to focus on other events that we need to take care of when they come in. And we're in the final stages right now of rolling out Workday as a master, and we have a lot of the same workflows that both Neil and Dan have spoken about as far as provisioning user accounts, email addresses, making sure that when they're deprovisioned, they are removed from applications all through the workflows that we are testing like demons right now so that we can run with this.
Great. Good to hear. Now I wanted to move on to another section, set of questions in which you talk about your first experiences with workflows. I've always described it to customers as a box of Legos, right? It's kind of daunting to use because you can just build so much with it. Krista, I know you're very early on in using workflows. Dan and Neil, you've used it for a while, but what practical tips or advice would you give to someone who's just starting to get their feet wet with workflows?
Well, for me, when I saw it last year at Octane, I was so excited because I knew that it could be leveraged to fix so many things that we were doing manually. I think I was slacking my boss during Octane going, we need this turned on, and we need to figure out how to use this. Downside is it is not as easy as you make it look on the screen. You have to definitely do some of your background research. I have leveraged the training that is offered through Okta, through the training site. I highly recommend it. It has a lot of workflows that you can go through just for testing, plugging into things like Smartsheet, which is something that we use and we have been building a workflow for to deprovision the users in Smartsheet and automatically assign them to our Smartsheet administrator when they're deprovisioned and before they are deleted so we don't lose any of their data. The best thing you can do is to reach out to anyone you can find that can help you. Definitely do the tutorials. And you've recently made available a bunch of templates, which bring up so many other things that I hadn't even thought about that you could use Okta workflows for.
We'll talk about templates too. Dan and Neil, you folks are experienced with workflows, but and you probably started out when we didn't have all these um, onboarding tutorials or resources that Krista now has. But I guess what advice would you give to newbies?
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely daunting when you start out, and yeah, I don't believe that we had maybe not even any of those resources that she mentioned. It was very, very early when we started using it. But yeah, I guess my advice would just be to start small. So of those two workflows that I've talked about, the workflow for the self-service was literally only, I think, 3 or 4 cards. And yeah, just put those together, play around with those sort of small bits, and then the rest will come later. And yeah, just keep playing. But definitely the templates and things, I haven't even had a chance to check them out, unfortunately. But that sounds like it makes those first few steps a lot easier.
I think for me, the single greatest recommendation that I can give to anybody starting out with workflows is learn how to read JSON. Learn the syntax, learn how to write it, and learn how to kind of identify issues with it. Because when you're working in a compose card and you're actually trying to output that compose into a response in a raw card, you're going to need it. And there were, I think I've lost track of how many times I had gotten the gotcha of missing a curly bracket or a brace somewhere. But aside from that, the templates have been a huge help. It's a great addition. I can't wait to see more in there. I can't wait. I believe there was a comment on the roadmap a couple months ago where we'll be able to upload our own templates somewhere in the future. Here's to hoping with that. I would love to share some of the work that I've done, and I'd love to help other people out because I think that it's an amazing product and there's a lot that can be done with it.
Good to hear. Yes.
Actually, when you mentioned that the first time, Neil, I wrote it down and signed myself up for a course. So I appreciate that.
I highly recommend it.
A few of you mentioned templates, and I didn't really talk about it too much in my section of the presentation, but templates are meant to be kind of teaching blocks. And so they will, for instance, show you how to use an HTTP card to make a request, an API request, or they'll show you how to do a report in Google Sheets. There's some templates that also allow you to build or that are built out flows end to end that you can just use out of the box. And most of them are more instructional in nature, and they just kind of teach you how to do small things. And then the idea is that hopefully you can weave those, you get an idea of what it can do, and then you weave them into your own automated processes. I think that came out within the past 2 quarters or so. And the idea is we've gotten a lot of requests from customers to actually allow customers to share flows with each other. So we need to build some sort of community that facilitates that. And we're excited to see what customers build. So as much as I believe that workflows can solve really complex use cases, nothing ever really goes as planned. What are some of the stumbling
There was one in particular person in Okta support that was actually my best friend during our launch of SuccessFactors. I think I spent 4 days straight on the phone with him. Had it not been for him, we probably wouldn't have gotten it off the ground. There was some areas of the documentation that were lacking. I put that kindly. But we made it through, and the documentation has vastly improved. I don't want to make it sound like it's still a problem. I was a very early adopter of this, so take that salt with a grain of salt. And then the other stumbling block that we ran into was trying to track down issues. One of my continuing pain points of the product is the log, and trying to find things, events in the log, especially when you're dealing with a 4,000 record import from SuccessFactors and trying to find one record. Yeah, that was one of our early pain points.
I know for us, I signed up for it probably 2 weeks after Octane got back and reached out to our manager, our Okta manager for our account, and said, we need this. I want to work with it. I got it on, opened it up, started looking at it, and went, okay, where does this plug in? There were no templates. There was very little documentation. There was no training that you had at that time. So while I got in later than everyone else, I was still kind of in the same boat where I was looking at it, and I haven't coded real code in about 20 years. So for me, it was okay, I know in my mind how this could work. We were trying to do the API call in Smartsheets to deactivate users, but what we were running into is we were not getting the correct information back, and we couldn't figure out why. I reached out again to my support person, and he went, let me see if I can hook you up with someone who's working in Okta with workflows. We had about an hour Zoom session where they helped us one by one work through the workflow and actually gave us a better way of interacting with the API rather than the API token, and nailed the whole thing within the hour. And then received additional information on how I can further build out that workflow to make it a little bit more robust and give us more information. So that was just incredible to be able to work one-on-one with an Okta workflow person.
Good to hear.
Yeah, for me, actually, I didn't take my own advice before. I actually started working on the more complex user activity workflows first because it was kind of the first thing off the rank. And I designed what I thought was a really nice flow with, I think it was about 6 or 7 workflows within there. And then I went and did a couple of other smaller workflows and actually learned a lot more about it. And then when I looked back at my user and activity workflows later, I realized that they were actually really inefficient. There was a lot more API calls than what I need to make. And I spent a couple of days and I redesigned the whole thing. And so it was kind of me helping myself, and ended up with these workflows that are much more efficient now and actually do what we want with a lot less calls. But I'd also reiterate what Neil said about the log. We ended up actually in most of our workflows we will like log a ticket to Zendesk or do some sort of external reporting or logging so that we can actually search that system to be able to find some of the results of what might be working or what might not be working within workflows.
Good. Glad to hear. Um, so I'm glad to report that we do have a set of training videos to help out new users. Um, I think they're structured from beginner to intermediate to advanced. And then we also have a corresponding set of videos, levels 101, 201, and 301 to also, and they're all free to help customers understand the features and adopt them. So hopefully if you have any questions, you'll be able to refer to those going forward. So I guess I'll move on to the last topic, which is future plans. So you folks have automated several use cases with workflows. What's next for you guys?
For me, for us at Xero, the next area that we're focusing on is managing Google Workspace. So first up, email delegation. We used to actually use a third-party product to manage those sorts of admin tasks within Google, the ones that are not available within the Google admin console. And now we've got a simple workflow that's triggered by a Google form to set up email delegation. And then we're doing a similar thing with managing Google Groups and creating Google Groups and that kind of thing within Workday, within workflows.
For us, I'm building out some new pretty much Slack bots that allow non-admins to do some limited administrative tasks like adding multi-channel guests to channels, potentially adding users to certain workspaces that aren't, we turned off a lot of the features to secure our workspaces in Slack. Unfortunately, if you're not an admin, you're really limited in certain instances. So we're trying to unblock our users while still trying to maintain a secure environment. So workflows is actually acting as the backbone to keeping it very fluid for us.
We're just trying to finish rolling out this Workday as a master. Every time we look at it, we think of other workflows that we can put in place once we get all of this stuff hammered out and the correct information into Okta so that we can do things like limit people by location or add them to territories or certain proprietary apps that we have within our systems.
Makes sense. And last question, I know we're coming up on time, but what feature enhancements, if any, would you like to see in the product?
Better documentation for help.
Searchable logs, filtering on events, meaning so if someone's added to a group, just show me show me a particular group, not every single group addition. That would help a lot with triggers and also reducing resource usage.
Yeah, I would say searchable logs would be a big one for us as well. And then, if we could have inline hooks from app requests from Okta that we could work with, that would be incredible as well.
Got it. Well, that's a wrap. I want to thank you all so much for your insight today. It's great to learn about your journeys, and it's good for customers and prospects to hear authentic stories from other customers who have not only succeeded with workflows but also struggled with it initially. So, thank you all for sharing your stories. Um, to wrap it up, I want to also recommend a few sessions that are workflows related. The big one is tomorrow, April 7th. We're having a roadmap session that'll highlight workflows. And then we also have our own Okta IT team, business technology team, talking about how they use workflows. And then we also have a customer story from Chipotle about how they embed workflows in their lifecycle management processes. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this session.